My daughter was ashamed of me for the first time in her life, and I couldn't blame her. It started with what should have been a simple parent-teacher conference. Emma had been struggling with math, and I'd taken time off from my construction job to meet with her teacher. What I didn't expect was to become the entertainment for the evening, or to watch my 8-year-old daughter's face crumble when she realized her dad was being mocked in front of other parents. I should have known Mrs. Henderson was going to be a problem the moment I walked into that classroom, and she rolled her eyes at me. Mr. C. Collins, I started, trying to introduce myself, but the words got stuck like they always do when I'm nervous or stressed. The stutter's been with me for 12 years now, ever since Iraq, and it gets worse under pressure. Mrs. Henderson didn't even try to hide her smirk. She was one of those teachers who'd been at Lincoln Elementary for 30 years and thought she'd seen everything. Tall, thin woman with graying hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and glasses that she peered over like she was examining something distasteful. "Oh my," she said, not even attempting to hide the mockery in her voice. "I see where Emma gets her communication challenges from." She emphasized those last two words like they were something dirty. I felt my face burn red, but I pressed on. "I'm here about Emma's math grades. She's a SM smart kid, but clearly genetics aren't in her favor," Mrs. Henderson interrupted, actually chuckling. "I have to say, Mr. Collins, it's refreshing to finally understand why Emma has such trouble expressing herself clearly in class. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it?" My hands clenched into fists under the table. I'd dealt with this crap before. People who heard the stutter and immediately wrote me off as stupid. But this was about my daughter, and I wasn't going to let this woman's attitude hurt Emma's education. "Oh, look, Mrs. Henderson," I tried again, forcing the words out slower. "Emma just needs some extra help with—" Needs, she mimicked, actually copying my stutter. "Mr. Collins, what Emma needs is a parent who can model proper speech patterns." How is she supposed to learn to communicate effectively when her father sounds like a broken record? The room went dead silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. The two other parents who were waiting for their conferences suddenly found their phones very interesting. Mrs. Henderson leaned back in her chair with a satisfied look like she just won some kind of contest. "I think," she continued, clearly enjoying herself now, "that before we worry about Emma's math skills, we should address the real problem. Have you considered speech therapy, Mr. Collins? There are programs for people with your difficulties. I'd hate for Emma to grow up thinking this kind of communication is normal." She handed me a business card for a speech therapist with the kind of fake sympathy that made my stomach turn. "I'm sure with enough practice you might be able to string together a complete sentence. Though at your age, I'm not sure how much improvement we can expect." I took the card with shaking hands, not trusting myself to speak. The stutter always got worse when I was angry, and right now I was furious. But I'd learned long ago that losing my temper only made things worse. I stood up slowly, looking down at this woman who thought she had me all figured out. "The thank you for your tea time," I managed, and walked out of that classroom feeling smaller than I had in years. The drive home was torture. Emma was at my ex-wife's for the weekend, which was probably good because I didn't want her to see me like this. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel and trying to get my breathing under control. The stutter had cost me jobs, relationships, and my confidence more times than I could count. But having it used against my daughter was a new kind of low. I'd been dealing with this for 12 years now, ever since that day in Ramadi when my world literally exploded. Before that, I'd been Staff Sergeant Mike Collins, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. I could give orders, lead men, and communicate under the most intense pressure you could imagine. The Mike Collins who'd stood up in front of 40 Marines and briefed mission details was gone forever, replaced by this broken version who couldn't get through a parent-teacher conference without being humiliated. But Emma didn't know any of that. To her, I was just Dad, the guy who helped with homework, made pancakes on Sunday mornings, and read bedtime stories, even if it took twice as long because of the stutter. She'd never made me feel bad about it, never seemed embarrassed. Until now, I'd never thought about how it might affect her at school. That night, I lay awake wondering if Mrs. Henderson was right. Maybe I was holding Emma back. Maybe my daughter was suffering because her father couldn't speak properly. The thoughts circled in my head like vultures, picking apart what little confidence I'd managed to rebuild over the years. Monday morning came too soon. I dropped Emma off at school and watched her run toward the building, her backpack bouncing with each step. She turned and waved at me like always, but this time I wondered if she was embarrassed by her stuttering dad. Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in my head. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. 2 days later, Emma came home from school quieter than usual. During dinner, she pushed her food around her plate without eating much. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked. She looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. "Dad, do I talk funny like you do?" My heart stopped. "What do you mean, Em?" Mrs. Henderson told the class that some people have trouble talking properly and that it can run in families. She kept looking at me when she said it. Emma's voice got smaller. Some kids laughed. I set down my fork, feeling that familiar rage building in my chest. It was one thing for that woman to humiliate me, but involving my 8-year-old daughter crossed a line I didn't even know existed. "Em, look at me," I said, and for once the words came out clear and strong. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with how you talk, and there's nothing wrong with how I talk either. Sometimes adults say things they shouldn't, but that doesn't make them true." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Mrs. Henderson had planted a seed, and it was going to grow unless I did something about it. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to Lincoln Elementary. I decided to have another conversation with Mrs. Henderson, this time without the pressure of a formal conference. Maybe I could make her understand how her words were affecting Emma. I found her in her classroom during her planning period, grading papers with the same sour expression she'd worn during our conference. She looked up when I knocked on the door frame. "Oh, Mr. Collins," she said, not bothering to hide her irritation. "I wasn't expecting you. Don't tell me you're here to complain about our little chat the other day." "I'm here about what you said to Emma's class," I started, but she cut me off immediately. "What I said?" She laughed, actually laughed. "Mr. Collins, I was teaching a lesson about communication skills. If your daughter felt uncomfortable, perhaps that's a sign that you should address your own issues instead of blaming me for pointing them out." She stood up and walked around her desk, crossing her arms. "Honestly, I'm doing you a favor. The sooner Emma understands that clear communication is important, the better. She shouldn't have to suffer because her father refuses to get help." "My daughter is not suffering," I said, the stutter getting worse as my anger rose. "She's a happy, smart kid who stutters just like her father," Mrs. Henderson interrupted. "I've heard her in class, Mr. Collins. She stumbles over words, loses her train of thought, gets frustrated when she can't express herself." Sound familiar? The room started spinning. Emma had never stuttered at home, not once. But maybe I'd been so focused on my own speech that I'd missed it. Maybe Mrs. Henderson was right, and I had passed this curse on to my daughter. "You know what your problem is, Mr. Collins," she continued, clearly enjoying watching me fall apart. "You're so wrapped up in feeling sorry for yourself that you can't see how you're damaging your child. Every day Emma sits in my classroom, she's reminded that she comes from a family that can't communicate properly. Do you have any idea how that affects a child's development?" I stood there taking it, the same way I'd learned to take it from employers, strangers, and anyone else who decided my stutter made me less than human. But this time was different. This time she was using my daughter as ammunition. "I think," Mrs. Henderson said, walking back to her desk and sitting down like she was dismissing me, "that Emma might benefit from some time with the school counselor. Perhaps we can work on helping her overcome the disadvantages she's inherited." That's when something inside me snapped. "You don't know anything about me," I said, my voice getting stronger, even as the stutter persisted. "You don't know anything about my daughter, and you sure as hell don't know anything about co-communication?" Mrs. Henderson looked up sharply, clearly not expecting any pushback. "Excuse me?" "I said you don't know anything," I repeated, stepping closer to her desk. "You think because I stutter, I'm stupid. You think because I struggle with words, I don't have anything important to say. But you're wrong. Mr. Collins, I think you should leave." "I'm not finished," I said, and something in my voice made her stop talking. "You want to know why I saint stutter, Mrs. Henderson? You want to know where this communication problem comes from?" She didn't answer, just stared at me with wide eyes. "March 15th, 2007, I continued, the words coming easier now that I'd found my rhythm. "I was a staff sergeant in the United States Marines, serving my second tour in Ramadi, Iraq. We got intel about an IED placed along a route that school buses used every morning." Mrs. Henderson's face had gone pale, but I kept going. "3 school buses, Mrs. Henderson, full of kids just like Emma. The insurgents had planted a bomb big enough to turn those buses into scrap metal. We had maybe 20 minutes before the first bus hit that route." My hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in 12 years, telling this story felt right. So I took my squad and we went after that bomb. Not because we had to, our orders were to wait for the explosive ordnance disposal team. But those kids didn't have time for protocol. Those kids needed someone to act. I could see Mrs. Henderson's mouth opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. We found the IED exactly where intelligence said it would be. 50 pounds of explosives buried under a culvert, with a trigger wire running back to a building 200 meters away. I sent my men to clear that building while I worked on the bomb. The memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday. The heat of the Iraqi sun, the sound of gunfire in the distance, the weight of the wire cutters in my hands. I had the bomb disarmed with 3 minutes to spare. 3 minutes before the first school bus would have driven over it. I was walking back to radio the all clear when the backup device detonated. Mrs. Henderson had gone completely white. The concussion threw me 15 feet and put me in a coma for 6 days. When I woke up, the doctors told me I had a traumatic brain injury. The stutter was just one of the souvenirs I brought home. But you know what, Mrs. Henderson? Those kids on those buses, they made it to school that day. All of them? I leaned forward, placing my hands on her desk. So when you mock my stutter, when you use it to hurt my daughter, when you act like it makes me less of a person, just remember that this stutter exists because I put my life on the line to save children. Kids who were the same age as your students, kids who mattered more to me than my own safety. Mrs. Henderson finally found her voice. I didn't know. No, you didn't, I said, and you never bothered to ask. You just assumed. You saw the stutter and decided you knew everything about me, just like you're doing to Emma. I straightened up and looked down at this woman who'd seemed so powerful just minutes before. My daughter doesn't stutter, Mrs. Henderson, but if she did, it wouldn't be something to be ashamed of. It would be a reminder that sometimes the most important things in life are worth fighting for, even if it costs you something. I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Oh, and Mrs. Henderson, the speech therapist you recommended? I've been seeing her for 12 years. She's the one who taught me that my worth as a person isn't measured by how smoothly I can speak. Maybe you should make an appointment with her yourself. I walked out of that classroom with my head higher than it had been in years, but I knew this wasn't over. Women like Mrs. Henderson didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone they'd written off as inferior. I expected retaliation, and I wasn't wrong. The next day, Emma came home from school in tears. Mrs. Henderson made me stand in front of the class and read a paragraph out loud. She sobbed into my shoulder. When I messed up one word, just one word, Dad, she made me start over. She said I needed to practice proper pronunciation so I wouldn't end up with communication problems like some people in my family. That was it. That was the moment I decided Mrs. Henderson had pushed the wrong Marine. I called my old buddy Rodriguez that night. Tony Rodriguez and I had served together in Iraq, and he'd gone on to make Sergeant Major before retiring. More importantly, he was now the Marine Corps liaison for school programs in our district. "Mike!" Tony's voice boomed through the phone. "How the hell are you, brother?" "Been better, Tony," I said, and told him the whole story, about Mrs. Henderson, about Emma, about everything. There was a long silence when I finished. Then Tony said, in a voice I remembered from our military days, "That ends now." "What do you mean?" "I mean that disrespecting a Marine veteran is one thing, but using it to hurt his kid, that's not happening on my watch. Give me 48 hours, Mike. I'm going to make some calls." "Tony, I don't want to cause trouble." "Brother, trouble already found you. Now it's time for trouble to find her." 2 days later, I got a call from Principal Martinez asking me to come to the school for a meeting. When I arrived, I found her waiting in the main office with a man in dress blues I didn't recognize. "Mr. Collins," Principal Martinez said, looking nervous, "I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison from the Marine Corps Recruiting Office." The colonel stepped forward and extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Sergeant Collins. I've been reading about your service record." I shook his hand, confused. "Sir, I'm not sure why." "Sergeant, we've been made aware of some issues regarding the treatment you and your daughter have received at this school, specifically from a teacher who seems to have forgotten that freedom isn't free." Principal Martinez cleared her throat. "Mr. Collins, we've had a chance to review the situation with Mrs. Henderson. Her behavior was completely inappropriate, and I want to personally apologize on behalf of Lincoln Elementary." "That's nice," I said, "but what about my daughter? What about the other kids who might be going through the same thing?" Lieutenant Colonel Morrison smiled. "That's exactly what we wanted to discuss with you. You see, Sergeant, the Marine Corps has a program where we visit schools to talk about service, sacrifice, and what it means to be a hero. We'd like to do a special presentation here at Lincoln Elementary. I must have looked confused because Principal Martinez jumped in. Mr. Collins, we'd like to hold a special assembly to honor your service and to educate our students about the sacrifices our veterans have made. We think it would be educational for everyone involved. 3 days later, I found myself standing in the wings of the Lincoln Elementary Auditorium, wearing my dress blue uniform for the first time in 12 years. It still fit, barely, and Tony had helped me get the ribbons in the right order. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the stutter waiting to ambush me the moment I opened my mouth. "You ready for this, brother?" Tony asked. He was standing next to me in his sergeant major uniform, along with Lieutenant Colonel Morrison and 4 other Marines from the local recruiting office. "I don't know if I can do this, Tony," I admitted. "What if I freeze up? What if I start stuttering and can't stop?" Tony put his hand on my shoulder. "Mike, you disarmed a bomb to save a bunch of kids you'd never met. You think you can't handle talking to a room full of elementary school students?" Principal Martinez appeared at my elbow. "We're ready for you, gentlemen." The auditorium was packed. Every student from kindergarten through 5th grade was there, along with all the teachers and most of the parents. I spotted Emma in the 3rd row, her eyes wide with excitement and confusion. She'd been told there was going to be a special assembly, but not that her dad would be part of it. Mrs. Henderson was sitting with the other 4th grade teachers, and the look on her face when she saw me in uniform was worth every nervous moment of the past week. Principal Martinez stepped up to the microphone. "Good morning, Lincoln Elementary. Today we have some very special guests who are here to talk to us about service, sacrifice, and what it means to be a hero in our community." She gestured toward us, and Tony led our little group onto the stage. The kids started clapping, the way kids always do when they see military uniforms. First, Principal Martinez continued, "I'd like you to meet Sergeant Major Tony Rodriguez, who served our country for 22 years in the United States Marine Corps." Tony stepped forward and gave a brief speech about service and dedication. He was a natural speaker, confident and clear, everything I wasn't. When he finished, he turned to me. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet someone very special, someone who proves that heroes don't always look the way you might expect them to, someone who shows us that the most important battles aren't always the ones that make the news." I stepped up to the microphone, my legs feeling like jelly. 500 pairs of eyes were looking at me, including Emma's and Mrs. Henderson's. "Hello?" I started, and immediately heard my stutter echo through the auditorium speakers. Some of the older kids shifted in their seats. I saw Mrs. Henderson lean forward with what looked like satisfaction. But then I saw Emma. My daughter was looking up at me with pure pride, and suddenly I remembered what Tony had said. I'd disarmed a bomb to save kids I'd never met. I could damn well tell my story to save the ones right in front of me. "My name is Mike Collins," I continued, letting the stutter happen without fighting it. "I'm Emma Collins' dad, and I'm a United States Marine." The auditorium went completely quiet. I know some of you are wondering why I talk the way I do, why I sometimes have trouble getting words out. Well, I'd like to tell you a story about that. And I did. I told them about Iraq, about the school buses, about the children who needed someone to act. I told them about the bomb, about waking up in a hospital bed, about learning to live with a brain injury that changed everything about how I communicated. The kids listened with the kind of attention you only see when someone is telling a story that matters. Even the kindergartners were completely still. "The D doctors told me I might never speak normally again," I said, finding my rhythm despite the stutter. "They said the brain injury might affect me for the rest of my life, and they were right. But you know what? I would make the same choice again tomorrow." I looked directly at Mrs. Henderson. Because sometimes the most important things we do don't come easy. Sometimes we have to struggle to get the words out. Sometimes we have to work harder than other people just to be heard. But that doesn't make our words less important. It doesn't make us less valuable as people. The auditorium was dead silent now. Even the teachers had stopped shifting in their seats. "I want all of you to remember something," I continued, looking out at all those young faces. "Everyone has something they struggle with. Everyone has something that makes them different, but those differences don't make us broken. They make us human. They make us real." I paused, gathering myself for the most important part. "And if you ever meet someone who's different from you, someone who talks differently, or looks differently, or acts differently, I want you to remember this story. I want you to remember that you don't know what battles they've fought. You don't know what they've sacrificed. You don't know what makes them heroes." When I finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Not the polite clapping you usually hear at school assemblies, but the kind of applause that comes from the heart. Kids were standing up, teachers were wiping their eyes, and parents were applauding like their lives depended on it. I spotted the two parents who'd been at that conference, the ones who had watched Mrs. Henderson humiliate me in silence. They were on their feet now, clapping harder than anyone, and one of them, a woman in a business suit who'd spent that entire conference staring at her phone, had tears streaming down her face. The other parent, a man who'd smirked when Mrs. Henderson mocked my stutter, was applauding so hard I thought his hands might fall off. But the best part was Emma. My daughter was on her feet, clapping and crying and beaming with pride. She mouthed, "I love you, Dad," across the auditorium, and I had to grip the microphone stand to keep from falling over. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stepped up to the microphone next. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just heard is the definition of courage. Sergeant Collins risked his life to save children he'd never met in a country thousands of miles from home. The injuries he sustained in that act of heroism have affected his speech, but they haven't affected his heart." He turned to me. "Sergeant Collins, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps and the children whose lives you saved, I'd like to present you with a letter of commendation for your service and sacrifice." The applause started again, even louder this time. I accepted the letter with shaking hands, but for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't ashamed of the shaking. Then Tony stepped back up to the microphone. "Before we finish today, we have one more surprise. The United States Marine Corps Band from Quantico has sent us a special recording to honor Sergeant Collins and all the veterans in our community." The auditorium speakers came alive with the sound of the Marines' Hymn, played by the full Marine Corps Band. 500 people stood up and listened in complete silence as the music filled the room. I saw teachers crying, parents saluting, and kids standing at attention like little soldiers. When the music ended, Principal Martinez returned to the microphone. "Lincoln Elementary has learned something very important today," she said, looking directly at Mrs. Henderson. "We've learned that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. We've learned that sometimes the people we think we understand are actually the people we know the least about. And we've learned that respect and kindness should always come first, especially when someone seems different from us." After the assembly, Emma ran up to me and threw her arms around my waist. "Dad, you're famous," she said, bouncing on her toes. "Everyone thinks you're awesome." "How do you feel about having a dad who stutters?" I asked, still worried about Mrs. Henderson's poison taking root. Emma looked at me like I'd asked the dumbest question in the world. "Dad, you're a hero." Heroes can talk however they want. That afternoon, I got a call from Principal Martinez asking me to come back to the school. When I arrived, I found Mrs. Henderson waiting in the main office, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. "Mr. Collins," she started, and her voice was completely different from the mocking tone I'd heard before. "I owe you an apology, a huge apology." I didn't say anything, just waited. "I was wrong," she continued, and I could see tears in her eyes. "I was completely, utterly wrong about you, about your daughter, about everything. I let my own prejudices blind me to who you really are, and I hurt both you and Emma in the process." She took a shaky breath. "I've been teaching for 30 years, and I thought I knew everything about kids and families. But today I learned that I don't know anything at all. I learned that I've been hurting people based on assumptions, and that's not the teacher I want to be." "Mrs. Henderson." I started, but she held up her hand. "Please let me finish. I've requested a transfer to another school. Emma deserves better than a teacher who would use a child's parent against her. And you deserve better than someone who would mock your sacrifice." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small American flag pin. "My grandfather was in World War II," she said quietly. "He never talked about the war, but he had nightmares until the day he died. I never understood what that meant until today. I never understood what service really costs." She pinned the flag to her shirt. "I'm going to wear this every day for the rest of my career, to remind me that I never know what battles the people in front of me have fought, to remind me that respect should always come first." 3 months later, Emma came home from school with her report card. Straight A's, including an A+ in math. Her new teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had included a note. "Emma is a joy to have in class. She's confident, articulate, and clearly comes from a family that values education and respect." That night, Emma and I were doing homework at the kitchen table when she looked up at me. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." "Are you proud of your stutter?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Well, it's part of what makes you a hero, right? If you didn't have the stutter, it would mean you never saved those kids." I thought about that for a long moment. For 12 years, I'd seen the stutter as something that made me less than I used to be. But Emma was right. It was also proof of something I'd done right. "You know what, Em? I think I am proud of it." She smiled and went back to her homework. "Good, because I'm proud of it too." 6 months after the assembly, Lincoln Elementary started a new program called Heroes in Our Community. Every month they invite a veteran, first responder, or community leader to speak to the students about service and sacrifice. The program has become so popular that other schools in the district have started their own versions. Mrs. Henderson never did transfer schools. Instead, she became one of the program's biggest supporters. She volunteers her time to research speakers and coordinate visits. Last month, she told me it had become the most rewarding part of her career. "I spent 30 years teaching kids to communicate," she said, "but I never learned to listen. As for me, I still stutter. I probably always will. But now when people hear it, I don't automatically assume they're judging me. And when they do judge me, I remember that their opinion doesn't define my worth. Emma's in high school now, and she's captain of the debate team. She never developed a stutter despite Mrs. Henderson's predictions. But more importantly, she never developed the fear of being different that I carried for so long. Last week, she brought home a new friend whose dad is a veteran with PTSD. The kid was embarrassed about his father's condition, afraid of what people might think. "You should meet my dad," Emma told him. "He'll teach you that being different isn't something to hide from. It's something to be proud of." And you know what? She was right, because sometimes the things that break us are also the things that make us stronger. Sometimes the wounds we carry are also the proof of battles we've won. 2 days later, Emma and I were at the grocery store when we saw them, her friend Tommy and his dad, a quiet man named Rick who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Tommy was pulling on his father's sleeve, trying to get him to leave because Rick was having one of those moments, staring off into space, lost in memories that wouldn't let him go. "Mr. Collins," Tommy called out when he saw us, his voice small and embarrassed. "My dad's being weird again." I knelt down next to Tommy and looked him in the eye. "You know what, buddy? My dad used to get lost in his thoughts, too, after he came back from Vietnam. It doesn't mean he's weird. It means he's carrying something heavy for all of us." I walked over to Rick, who was still staring at nothing, his jaw clenched tight. "Marine?" I asked quietly. "Army," he said without looking at me. "Sorry, I just crowd sometimes." "No apology needed, brother," I said. "Staff Sergeant Mike Collins, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Iraq, 2006 and 2007. Rick's eyes focused on me for the first time. "Sergeant Rick Morrison, 10th Mountain Division, Afghanistan." "Tommy," Emma said, taking the boy's hand, "want to know a secret? My dad gets scared too sometimes. But that doesn't make him less of a hero. It makes him more of one." We ended up talking for 20 minutes in that grocery store aisle. Rick told us about his struggles, about feeling like he was failing his son. I told him about the stutter, about Mrs. Henderson, about learning that our wounds don't define our worth. When we parted ways, Tommy was walking differently, not hunched over with embarrassment, but standing a little taller. As they headed toward the checkout, I heard him say to his dad, "You know what, Dad? I think you're pretty brave, too." Emma squeezed my hand. "Good job, Dad." Sometimes a stutter isn't a weakness at all. Sometimes it's just evidence that when it mattered most, when children needed someone to act, someone did. And that someone was me.